Thomas was a quiet man. He didn't talk much. He just worked. Every morning before the office building filled with people in suits and heels, Thomas was already there, cleaning the floors, wiping windows, making sure everything was ready for the day. No one really looked at him. No one asked his name. To most of the people who worked in the building, he was just the janitor. He wore the same clothes every day, a dark blue uniform with patches on the elbows and a name tag. That read Thomas. His shoes were old, and his hands were rough from years of cleaning, but his face was kind, and his eyes were gentle. He smiled sometimes, but only when someone looked him in the eye. And that didn't happen often. Thomas wasn't always a janitor. But nobody knew that. And he never told them. Every evening, after finishing his shift, he would rush home to his small apartment on the edge of the city. There, a little boy waited for him by the window. His son, Eli. Eli was 10 years old, smart and full of life, but he had been in a wheelchair since he was a toddler. A sickness had taken away his ability to walk, but it never touched his heart. He had a laugh that filled the room and a smile that made Thomas forget how tired he was. Thomas was both mother and father to Eli. His wife, Sphera, had died during childbirth. Thomas had held her hand as she faded away, smiling at him even while she struggled to breathe. She never got to hold her son. That memory still lived in Thomas's chest like a weight. He never talked about it. He never needed to. The pain was always there, like a quiet shadow. Back in the office building, life moved fast. Employees ran to meetings. Managers gave orders. The CEO's car pulled up every morning at 9 a.m. sharp. Thomas always stepped out of the way and nodded politely. He was invisible to most. People didn't notice the man mopping the floor, changing the bulbs, or fixing a broken chair. He was just maintenance. There were a group of interns who especially liked to laugh at Thomas. Young, loud, always taking selfies in the lobby, drinking expensive coffee, and calling him Mr. Clean. They didn't mean to be cruel, but they were careless. They saw his silence as weakness, his job as failure. One of them even said once, "That guy looks like he's been mopping since birth." Thomas never reacted, just kept working. 1. Friday, the company was preparing for a lunch event in the main lobby. It was a fancy gathering with catered food, speeches, and a large black grand piano brought in for decoration.
Oh.
Nobody was expected to play it. It was just there to make the room look classy. As Thomas cleaned near the piano, he looked at it for a long moment. His hand rested on it gently, ran his fingers along the keys without pressing them. Just the feel of the piano brought something to life inside him, a flicker, a memory. He hadn't touched a piano in over 10 years. He had once been a musician. A real one. He had studied at a music academy, won a few competitions, even played in front of small crowds. His dream was to become a concert pianist, but dreams die quietly when life shouts louder. After Sarah died and Eli was born, Thomas left everything. Behind the concerts, the piano, the music. He sold their upright piano to pay medical bills. He took whatever job he could find. Cleaning was honest work. It paid enough to survive. And that's all he needed. That day, during the event, the interns were standing nearby, laughing loudly, sipping sodas. One of them, a tall guy named Jordan, noticed Thomas looking at the piano. He nudged his friend. "Hey, check this out. Looks like the janitor's thinking about playing Beethoven." They all laughed. Then Jordan called out, "Hey, Mr. Clean, you play?" Thomas looked up, unsure if he was serious. "Come on," Jordan grinned. "Give us a tune. We want to hear something." "Bet you can do Twinkle Twinkle." More laughter followed. A few people nearby turned their heads. Thomas stayed quiet. Then, slowly, he walked over to the piano. Jordan raised his eyebrows. "No way he's actually going to do it." Thomas sat down gently on the bench. His fingers hovered above the keys. He didn't speak. The room wasn't completely silent. People were still talking and eating, but there was a sense of curiosity. Now, a few workers turned to look. One lady stopped mid-bite. Another took out her phone, just in case something funny happened. Then Thomas started to play. The first note was soft, so soft it was almost a whisper. But then came the second, then the third, and suddenly, the room changed. The music was deep, emotional, beautiful. His fingers moved like they remembered everything, not just the notes, but the feelings behind them. It was not just playing. It was storytelling through sound. A hush fell over the lobby. People stopped, talking. Forks froze in midair. Phones dropped slowly. Even the interns stood still, their smiles gone. The music spoke of love, of sorrow, of quiet nights and long mornings. It spoke of dreams lost and hope buried. It spoke of a father who had given up everything for his son. It spoke of a man who had once lived in the light, but now walked silently in the shadows. Thomas didn't look at the crowd. He didn't need to. His eyes were closed. His hands were flying. It was like he was somewhere else back in time. Maybe on a stage, or maybe just in his old living room with Sarah listening. When the piece ended, nobody clapped at first. They were too stunned. Then someone began slowly, and another, and another, until the whole room was filled with applause. Thomas stood up quietly. He didn't bow. He didn't smile. He just nodded once and walked away, picking up his mop again. CEO, Mr. Whitmore, had come down from his office during the performance. He had stood at the back, arms crossed, watching everything. Now he walked over to one of his assistants. "Who was that?" he asked. The assistant replied, He's the janitor, sir." "Thomas." Mr. Whitmore said nothing, just kept looking at the piano, lost in thought. Later that evening, when Thomas returned home, Eli was waiting at the window as always. Thomas opened the door and smiled. Eli grinned. "Wide, how was work, Dad?" he asked. Thomas chuckled softly. "Busy, a little different today." "Different how?" Eli asked, rolling his wheelchair closer. "I played the piano," Thomas said casually. Eli's eyes lit up. "Really? All this time?" Thomas nodded. Eli clapped. "Was it awesome? Did they love it?" "I think they were surprised," Thomas said with a small smile. Eli moved to the corner of the room where an old keyboard sat, one they had picked up from a garage sale months ago. "You're going to play for me tonight, right?" Thomas walked over, sat beside him, and put his fingers on the keys. They were cheap, a bit out of tune, but that didn't matter. "Always," Thomas said, and he began to play. In the quiet apartment, as the sun set outside, the music filled the space. It wasn't about applause or success. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It was about love, about connection, about a father and his son, and about a song that had been waiting deep inside to be heard again. What Thomas didn't know was that back at the office, people were still talking. Emails were being sent. Videos were being shared. One of the workers had uploaded a short clip online titled, "When the Janitor Plays Like a Concert Pianist." In just a few hours, it would begin to spread. But Thomas, sitting in his little apartment with Eli, didn't care. He didn't even know. He just played. Because in that moment, nothing else mattered. After that day in the office lobby, something started to change. Not all at once, but slowly, like a quiet wave that rises without anyone noticing. People began to look at Thomas differently. Some nodded at him when he passed by. Few even smiled. The same employees who never bothered to see him before now watched him with a kind of quiet curiosity. But Thomas stayed the same. He still came early and left late, still mopped the floors, emptied the trash, fixed broken things without complaint. He didn't speak much, and he didn't seem to care about the attention. The only time his eyes softened was when someone mentioned the piano. Then a little flicker would pass through his expression, like a memory floating in and out of his heart. The video clip that one of the employees put online started gaining attention. At first, it had a few hundred views. Then it hit thousands, then tens of thousands. It was titled, "When the Janitor Plays Like a Concert Pianist," and in the short video, you could see Thomas sitting at the grand piano in his work uniform, head slightly down, eyes closed, fingers moving gracefully over the keys. The music in the clip was haunting and emotional. Comments began flooding in. Who is this man? Why is he a janitor and not a world-famous musician? This brought me to tears. Just wow. The clip was shared across platforms, reaching people far outside the walls of the company. Music teachers shared it with students. Piano players posted reactions. Some even tried to play the same piece, but very few could match the emotion Thomas had poured into it. His playing wasn't just technical, it was filled with something deeper. Something real. Back at the office, the young interns who had laughed at him the day of the performance now walked with their heads lower. Jordan, the one who made the joke, hadn't said much since. He had watched the video late at night, alone in his room, and something in him had shifted. The way Thomas played, it made him feel small, but not in a bad way. It made him realize that people have entire worlds inside them, and you never really know someone just by looking. Mr. Whitmore, the CEO, couldn't stop thinking about that moment in the lobby. He had come down that day for a brief check-in with a client, but ended up standing still, completely pulled in by the music. That piece wasn't just beautiful, it was familiar. It stirred something deep in his heart that he had locked away long ago. Later that week, Mr. Whitmore asked his assistant to set up a private meeting with Thomas. At first, Thomas thought it was a mistake. He had never been asked to go to the top floor. The CEO's office was a place for big decisions and powerful people, not janitors. But the request was real. He was nervous but said yes. When he entered the office, he felt small. The room was huge, with glass windows, shelves of books, a large desk, and modern furniture. Mr. Whitmore stood up and walked toward him, not with the cold confidence of a boss, but with something softer in his eyes. "Thomas, thank you for coming," the CEO said, offering a chair. Thomas sat, unsure what to say. "I watched your performance," Whitmore continued. "I also watched the video, and I want to know, where did you learn to play like that?" Thomas was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "A long time ago. I went to music school, played in some concerts. I used to dream of doing it professionally." Whitmore leaned forward. "What happened?" "My wife died during childbirth," Thomas said, his voice low. "Our son. He's in a wheelchair. I couldn't keep up the dream. I sold my piano to pay bills. Took the first job I could find. Been working ever since." There was silence. Whitmore looked away for a second. He opened a drawer, pulled out a small photograph, and held it up. It was a picture of a young girl, maybe 16 or 17, sitting at a piano, smiling brightly. "My daughter," he said quietly. "Her name was Chloe. She passed away 5 years ago in a car accident." Thomas blinked slowly. I'm sorry," Whitmore nodded. "She used to play the same piece you did that day. Exactly the same. I got out ahead since her funeral. But when you played it, it was like I was hearing her voice again. Through your hands." Thomas said nothing, but his eyes softened. "You brought something back to me," Whitmore continued, his voice tightening. "Something I thought was gone forever." There was a pause between them. Two fathers. Two men who had lost something. Too heavy to carry, but too important to forget. Whitmore took a breath and said, "Would you consider coming to my home? Not as a janitor, just as a guest. I'd like to hear you play again." Thomas hesitated. "I appreciate that, sir, but I'm not looking for favors." "It's not a favor," Whitmore said gently. "It's an invitation." Thomas still wasn't sure. But before he could respond, Whitmore added, "Bring your son. I'd like to meet him." Later that weekend, Thomas and Eli arrived at the CEO's estate. The house was enormous, the kind of place Eli had only seen on TV. But Mr. Whitmore greeted them at the door himself. No suit, no tie, just a man opening his home. Inside, there was a large music room. In the center stood a beautiful grand piano, polished and untouched for years. Eli rolled up beside it and looked at it wide-eyed. "Is this what you used to play on, Dad?" Thomas smiled. "Something like this." Whitmore watched from the corner as Thomas sat down and started to play softly. This time the piece was lighter, brighter, something full of hope. Eli closed his eyes and swayed to the music. When it ended, Whitmore was standing completely still. He clapped softly, his eyes wet. "That was Chloe's favorite piece when she was little," he said. After that day, Whitmore and Thomas stayed in touch. They didn't talk about business. They talked about music, about parenting, about pain, about the past. One afternoon, Whitmore visited Thomas's small apartment. Eli welcomed him like an old friend, showing him his comic books and talking about superheroes. The CEO sat on the worn-out couch, listening, smiling. He looked around the apartment. It was small but clean, simple but filled with warmth, he noticed. Drawings on the fridge, books on a shelf, a second-hand keyboard near the window. He turned to Thomas and said, "You gave up everything for your son." Thomas nodded. "He's my whole world. I don't regret it." Whitmore smiled. "Shouldn't." Later, before leaving, Whitmore stood at the door and said something that surprised Thomas. "Would you consider performing at our company's annual charity gala?" Thomas blinked. "Me? Why?" "This year's theme is hidden talent. Second chances, I want you to be our head performer." Thomas almost laughed. "Sir, I clean floors. People don't want to see me in a tuxedo playing Mozart. They want to feel something," Whitmore said. "When you play, they do." Thomas looked uncertain. "I don't know. I'm not that man anymore." Eli rolled over. "Yes, you are, Dad. You just forgot. But I see him every day." Thomas looked at his son. The boy who gave him strength. The boy who believed in him, even when he didn't believe in himself. He nodded slowly. "I'll think about it." That night, Thomas couldn't sleep. He sat by the window, staring at the city lights. He thought about the life he used to dream of. The stages, the applause, the music. Then he thought about diapers, sleepless nights, hospital visits, and how Eli used to cling to him like his whole world depended on him. Because it did, he had made peace with giving up his dream. But now, was it possible to have both? The next morning he told Eli, "Let's do it." Eli shouted with joy, "Yes. You're going to show them who you are." Thomas laughed for the first time in weeks. What he didn't know was that this decision would not only change his life, but also touch the hearts of people he'd never even met yet. The decision to perform at the company's charity gala was not easy for Thomas. Even after agreeing, he still questioned himself every night. What if he messed up? What if he froze? It had been so many years since he had played in front of a crowd. The piano in the lobby was different. That moment came from emotion, not from a plan. This time, people would be expecting something. They would be watching. And Thomas was scared. But Eli wasn't scared at all. He was excited. Every evening after school, he would ask his father, "What are you going to play? And do you need to practice more?" He would sit by the second-hand keyboard in the corner of their living room and listen with wide eyes. Sometimes he would even tap a rhythm on his wheelchair armrest and say, "Faster, Dad. This part is the best." Thomas smiled more now. Music had returned to his home, and it felt like welcoming back an old friend. He started practicing again. At first, his fingers were stiff. His timing was off. He even made mistakes that frustrated him. But slowly, day by day, the music came back to life, not just in his hands, but in his heart. Playing again was like remembering who he truly was before the pain, before the loss, before the years of silence. One day, Mr. Whitmore invited him to visit the venue where the charity gala would be held. It was a grand hall with shining floors, crystal chandeliers, and a stage large enough to hold an orchestra. Thomas stood in the center and looked around. He had never played anywhere like this. Whitmore walked beside him and said, "The whole city's elite will be here. Business leaders, artists, media. But they're not coming for money this year. They're coming for a story, for inspiration. For you." Thomas turned to him. "Why me?" "Because you reminded people that there is beauty hidden in unexpected places. And because you reminded me of something I forgot, how music can heal." Whitmore then walked to the side of the stage and sat in the front row. He leaned forward and said, "Let me tell you something I haven't told anyone." Thomas stayed, quiet, and listened. "When Chloe was a little girl," Whitmore said, "she had trouble speaking. She was shy. She stuttered. But when she played piano, she became someone else. Confident, brave, she once told me. Dad, when I play, I feel like I can say everything I'm too scared to speak." Thomas swallowed hard. "She wanted to study music in Paris. continued, his voice softer now. I promised her we'd go after her next birthday, but she never made it. After she died, I closed the music room, couldn't even look at it. I'd built businesses, made more money, bought more things. But I never played her favorite song again. He looked up, straight into Thomas's eyes. Until you played it. Thomas didn't know what to say. For a few seconds, both men just sat there in silence. I want to give you something, Whitmore said. He pulled out a small envelope from his coat pocket. This was hers. I think it's time someone else made use of it. Inside the envelope was an old, slightly worn sheet of music, handwritten with little doodles in the corners. It was Chloe's favorite song, and she had marked her own notes on it. Stars, hearts, and tiny arrows where she thought the piece should feel lighter or sadder. Thomas held it carefully, like it was made of glass. Thank you, he whispered. The days passed quickly. Thomas worked during the mornings and practiced at night. His hands grew stronger. His confidence returned. Eli watched every session, giving small advice like a coach. Start slow here, he'd say. That part should sound like magic. Sometimes he would fall asleep beside the keyboard, and Thomas would carry him to bed. Kissing his forehead, one night Eli said something that made Thomas freeze. Dad, he whispered sleepily. When you play, Mom would have smiled so big. Thomas looked at him. You think so? I know so, Eli said. She's probably listening right now. The night of the gala arrived. Thomas wore a clean black suit borrowed from Whitmore's own collection. He had his hair trimmed. He looked different, not just because of the clothes, but because of something shining in his eyes. A quiet strength. Eli wore a little vest, and a matching bow tie. He looked proud, like he was escorting a celebrity. When they arrived at the hall, photographers were already flashing cameras. Guests entered through red carpets. People laughed, sipped wine, and whispered about the special performer for the night. No one expected the man in the wheelchair, and the quiet older gentleman with calloused hands to be the stars of the evening inside. The event began with speeches and short performances. Then the lights dimmed, and Whitmore took the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, his voice deep and calm. Tonight is not just about raising money. It's about seeing people we've ignored, listening to voices we've missed. I want to introduce someone who reminded me what true talent looks like and what love sounds like. He paused. Please welcome ... Thomas. There was polite applause. People looked around, confused. Where was the performer? A few guests whispered, Isn't that the janitor? Thomas walked onto the stage slowly. He sat at the piano, took a deep breath, and closed his eyes. Then he began to play. The music was quiet at first, soft, like a whisper in a crowded room. Then it grew stronger, deeper, more emotional. It danced, it wept, it laughed. It reached into every corner of the hall and wrapped itself around each listener's heart. It wasn't just notes. It was a story. It was love. It was pain. It was hope. People forgot to breathe. Eli sat in the front row, eyes wide, hands on his lap, watching his father become the man he always believed him to be. Somewhere in the back, a woman started crying. Then another. Even the servers stopped to listen. Phones were lifted. The performance was recorded from every angle. When Thomas played Chloe's favorite piece, he added his own touch. He followed her doodled notes. He made the music smile the way she must have smiled when she played it. And Whitmore, sitting in the front row, wept openly. When the final note faded, there was a long silence, not because people didn't like it, but because they were stunned, moved, changed. Then the applause came. It started slowly, then grew into a thunderstorm of claps, cheers, even people standing. A standing ovation for a man they once walked past without a glance. Thomas stood, bowed slightly, and returned to his seat beside Eli. You were amazing, Eli whispered. Thomas smiled. I just told our story. The next day, the videos from the gala spread everywhere. News outlets shared them. Online blogs wrote articles with headlines like, Single dad janitor moves crowd to tears with stunning piano performance. People around the world commented. Some offered music deals. Others wanted interviews. But Thomas stayed grounded, didn't care about fame. He only cared that his son saw him as someone strong, someone who never gave up. The company's board, inspired by the performance, started a new foundation called the Hidden Gift Project, aimed at finding and supporting talented people who had been overlooked by society. Whitmore named Thomas as its first mentor and musical director. Thomas accepted. But on one condition. "I still want to work part-time as janitor," he said. Whitmore laughed. "Why? Because that job helped me raise my son. It kept food on the table. I don't want to forget where I came from." Whitmore respected that. Thomas continued to play music. He taught kids in low-income schools. He helped build a free community music program. Eli even started learning piano. His small fingers struggled, but his spirit never gave up. At the end of one special evening, Thomas and Eli performed a duet together. The crowd cheered. Whitmore was there too, smiling, heart full. After the show, he handed Thomas something, a small, sealed letter. "I found this in Chloe's old piano bench," he said. "I think she meant it for someone who would understand." Thomas opened it at home. It read, "To whoever finds this, if you're playing this song, I hope you play it with your whole heart. Music is how I speak. Maybe one day it will help someone find their voice too." Thomas closed his eyes. Tears ran down his face. He had found his voice again. And now he was helping others find theirs. Thomas never thought life could change this much. Just a few months ago, he was sweeping floors and fixing light bulbs. He was ignored, unnoticed, invisible in a world that moved too fast to care. But now, things were different. People stopped. Him in the streets shook his hand and said, "You inspired me." Some asked for pictures. Others cried and told him how his music touched their hearts. But Thomas didn't care about the attention. All he cared about was Eli. Their small apartment still looked the same. Same secondhand furniture, the same tiny kitchen, the same keyboard near the window. But the air inside felt lighter now. There was laughter again. Music played in the background most days, and Eli practiced the piano after school while Thomas cooked dinner. The sound of missed notes and mistakes didn't bother him. They were signs of growth, signs that Eli was trying, signs that something beautiful was beginning. Every Sunday, Thomas visited the community center, where he now taught music to children. The foundation, created by Mr. Whitmore after the gala, was called the Hidden Gift Project, and it focused on finding talented people from poor or forgotten places, kids who had dreams but no money, or adults who had talent but no opportunity. Thomas was its heart. The first time he stepped into the classroom, he was nervous. He had never been a real teacher before. But when he sat at the piano and played a simple tune, the children went quiet, their eyes lit up. And just like that, they trusted him. One student, a shy girl named Nira, came from a broken home. She barely spoke. But after a few weeks of watching Thomas play, she whispered, "Can I try?" She touched the keys like they were made of gold. Her fingers trembled, but the sound that came out was soft and sweet. Thomas smiled and said, "You have a gift." That was all she needed to hear. Week by week, the program grew. More children joined. A teenage boy named Jamal came with a burned-out keyboard missing 2 keys. A woman in her 60s, who had always wanted to play but never had the chance, signed up and cried the first time she played a full song. Music filled the rooms like sunshine, and Thomas felt something he hadn't felt in years: purpose. Eli loved coming to the center too. He made friends there and started helping other kids with their lessons, even began composing little songs of his own, asking Thomas to play them on the real piano. "This one's about you," he said once. "I called it Dad's Hands." Thomas laughed and asked why. "Because your hands clean, fix, cook, and now, that they sing." Mr. Whitmore often visited the center quietly. He didn't wear a suit when he came. He just walked around, listened, and sometimes even helped organize chairs. He and Thomas had become close, not boss and employee friends. They shared more than music now. They shared memories, stories of loss, moments of joy, in a quiet respect that didn't need many words. One afternoon, Whitmore asked Thomas to join him for lunch. They sat in a small cafe, far from the fancy restaurants they were used to. "I've been thinking," Whitmore said as he stirred his tea. "We're helping children, yes, but what about adults?" Thomas looked up. "What do you mean?" "There are people out there like you," Whitmore explained. "People who gave up their passions for their families, who worked 2 jobs, who forgot what it feels like to dream. What if we created a second program, one for hidden talents in adults?" Thomas nodded slowly. "I like that. I want you to lead it," Whitmore said. "You know their hearts. You've lived their stories." Thomas didn't answer right away. He thought about the nights he came home too tired to think, the years he spent putting others first, the music he buried so deep it almost disappeared. Then he looked at Whitmore and said, "Let's do it." The new program launched 2 months later. It was called The Second Note. The first workshop brought in 30 adults, janitors, cashiers, single moms, retired workers. Some hadn't touched an instrument in years. Some never had. But all of them had something inside waiting to be unlocked. The stories were powerful. A man who once played guitar in high school but sold it to pay rent. A nurse who wrote poems during night shifts. A grandmother who used to sing lullabies and wanted to remember them before her memory faded. Thomas listened to them all and said the same words. It's never too late. Became more than a teacher. Became a guide, a friend, a reminder that dreams don't have an expiration date. One evening, after a long day at the center, Thomas came home and found Eli sitting at the window with his notebook open. "What are you writing?" Thomas asked. "A speech," Eli said proudly. "A speech. For what?" "For your next concert," Eli grinned. "You need someone to introduce you, right?" Thomas chuckled. "You're serious?" "It's very," Eli nodded. "You're not just my dad. You're someone the world needs to hear." A few weeks later, Thomas was invited to perform at a citywide music festival. Thousands would attend. It was a big deal. First he hesitated. He wasn't sure he was ready for something so public. But Eli looked him in the eyes and said, "You didn't come this far just to hide again," Thomas agreed. The day of the festival, he stood backstage, heart pounding. He looked at his hands, the same hands that had once only held mops and rags. Now they were about to speak to thousands through music. The announcer came on stage. "Tonight's next performer is not just a musician. He's a father, a mentor, and the soul behind a movement that is changing lives. Please welcome, Mr. Thomas Hale." Thunderous applause followed. But before Thomas walked out, Eli rolled up beside him. "Wait," he said. "My turn." "Ah!" Eli took the mic and looked out at the huge crowd. "My name is Eli," he said proudly. "And I want to tell you about my dad. People used to ignore him. They walked past him. They never asked his name. But I always knew who he was. He's my hero. And tonight, he's going to remind you that magic can come from the quietest places." The crowd erupted. Thomas walked out, wiping a tear from his eye. He sat at the piano and played. And played. This time wasn't about fear or proving himself. It was about sharing love. Every note was for Eli, for Sarah, for Chloe, for every soul who had given up on their dream. The music was bold and free, full of strength and grace. After his performance, the mayor came up to him. Sponsors offered to support more programs. One even said, "You should record an album." But Thomas just smiled and said, "Let's talk about the kids first." Back at home, life went on simply. Thomas still cleaned up after dinner, folded laundry, helped Eli with homework. But now, there were letters in the mail from strangers, saying, "Your story gave me hope." There were children learning to play their first song, adults writing again, people believing again. Thomas knew one thing now. His music had returned for a reason, not for fame, not for fortune. Lift others, and most of all, to show Eli what strength really looks like. Time passed, and with it came changes that Thomas never expected, but quietly welcomed. What started as a small moment a janitor asked to play piano as a joke, had turned into a journey that transformed his life and the lives of many others. Thomas and Eli's days became filled with music, hope, and new friendships. Their little apartment, once a quiet and lonely place, was now a home full of laughter, song, and dreams being nurtured. Every morning, Thomas would wake to Eli's bright smile, and every night they would play piano together, their music weaving a bond stronger than any words could express. Eli's health, while still delicate, had improved thanks to better care and the support from the community that had grown around them. He started attending a school that welcomed children with special needs, where teachers understood him and helped him grow in new ways. Thomas felt relief and pride watching his son gain confidence, making friends and sharing his own love for music. The foundation Thomas helped build, the Hidden Gift Project, blossomed. It was no longer just a local program. It had become a beacon of hope for countless people who had talents buried beneath hardships. Thomas spent his days teaching music, mentoring students, and sharing his story, not to seek praise, but to inspire others to believe in themselves. One chilly autumn evening, Thomas received a letter. It was from a woman named Claire, a music teacher in a nearby town. She wrote that after seeing Thomas's story online, she had started a music class for teenagers who had lost hope. She thanked Thomas for reminding her why music mattered, why it could heal broken hearts and light dark paths. Letters like that came often from all over the country. People wrote about how they had stopped chasing their dreams, or never even dared to dream in the first place. Some shared their own stories of loss and struggle. Others simply said, "Thank you for showing that it was never too late to start again." Thomas kept every letter in a box, reading them on quiet nights when doubt crept in. Those words reminded him why he played, why he taught, why he believed. Mr. Whitmore remained a close friend and supporter. The two men often met to talk, not just about business or music, but about life, about loss, love, and what it meant to keep moving forward when the world seemed heavy. Whitmore sometimes shared memories of Chloe, and Thomas told stories about Sarah and Eli. They found comfort in each other's company. Two fathers connected by grief and hope. One afternoon, Whitmore surprised Thomas by inviting him to a small private gathering at his home. When Thomas arrived, he was led to the music room, the very place where Thomas had once played for Whitmore and Eli. This time, though, something was different. The room was brighter, filled with sunlight and fresh flowers. Whitmore handed Thomas a small wrapped box. "Open it," he said softly. Inside was a beautiful handcrafted piano bench. Engraved on it were the words, "For Thomas, a father, a musician, a friend." Thomas was speechless. Tears filled his eyes. He looked at Whitmore and whispered, "Thank you." Whitmore smiled. "You gave me something I thought was lost forever. Now it's time for you to keep giving." Thomas placed the bench in his apartment beside the old piano. Every time he sat there, he felt the weight of the journey, the pain, the sacrifices, the love and the power of music to heal and connect. Together, Thomas and Eli continued to grow, learn, and dream. Eli's music became more confident. He composed small songs, often inspired by the stories Thomas told him about Sarah, about Chloe, and about the strength they both carried in their hearts. One day, Thomas organized a community concert. It wasn't about fame or money. It was about celebration of life, of hope, of second chances. Children from the foundation, adults from the Second Note program, friends from the neighborhood, all came together to share their talents. Eli was the star of the evening. He played a song he wrote himself, dedicated to his father. The audience listened in silence, moved by the courage and beauty of a boy who had overcome so much. After the concert, Whitmore stood with tears in his eyes and said quietly to Thomas, "You changed all of our lives, showed us what true strength is." Thomas smiled, feeling the warmth in his chest. "We changed each other," he replied, "and the music will keep going." As the night settled, Thomas looked at Eli and whispered, "You made me believe again." Eli smiled back, "And you made me dream." The story of a single dad janitor who was asked to play piano as a joke had become a story of hope, a story about never giving up, about the power of love, and the magic that can come from the most unexpected places. Thomas understood now that it was about the moments that touched hearts, the courage to rise after falling, and the music that lives inside all of us, waiting to be heard. And as long as he had Eli by his side, Thomas knew they could face anything. Together they would keep playing their song of hope, healing, and endless love.